Of course, the RAC is one of 25 VA committees that are governed by the Federal Advisory Committee Act, and that act provides for a designated federal officer who is the liaison. In this case, I am the liaison between the committee and the VA. And the committee is charged with providing advice to the Secretary of Veterans Affairs regarding Gulf War research. So the meeting is for the committee. The committee has invited a number of speakers, whom we'll see later, who will be providing updates on the kinds of research areas that are of interest to Gulf War veterans, and these talks allow the committee to be better informed as they make recommendations to the Secretary. So the discussions and questions that will come up today are to involve the committee members, the speakers, the invited speakers, and members of the VA who are here to respond to some of the committee's questions. As obviously you know, this is an open meeting, and we'll have time on the agenda later in the day for public comments for any of you who wish to make comments to do so. There are sign-up sheets at each end of the room. If you want to make a comment, please put your name on the list. And be prepared to keep your comments to 5 minutes so that we can get as many people at a podium as we can. If your comments are very lengthy, submit a written statement, and that statement will become part of the meeting record. Another thing that I think we all know is that some of the members will be rotating off the committee at the end of the month. And so we are seeking nominations for new members. The nominations close on the 9th of October, so there's still time to nominate people. The requirements are in a Federal Register notification that went out on September 8th. If anybody wants that Federal Register, I can send you a PDF file. And then lastly, we're trying something a little new. Dr. Steve Hunt up in Seattle and Dr. Lucille Burgo in Connecticut have set up the Adobe Connect that you see on the screens here, and we're going to try to use this medium, and this will allow the folks on the phone to see the slides as we see them. If you are on the phone and you would like to log on to the Adobe Connect, contact Dr. Hunt. His email address is stephen.hunt@va.gov, stephen.hunt@va.gov. So anybody out there who wants to log in can do so as a guest. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Dr. Hauser.
Thank you. It's being recorded too.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Everything is being recorded, and it will be accessible after the meeting as well. So those of you who can't see it now can see it later, and anyone who wasn't able to come, wasn't able to call in, can see it later as well.
Thank you. Well, I would like to begin with two comments prior to asking Dr. Leidy to be our first presenter this morning. The first is, some of you may be aware that there was a superb VA-sponsored state-of-the-art conference on traumatic brain injury that took place on July 24th and 25th here in Washington, D.C. And this was led by Secretary McDonald, who was there for the entire two-day conference. It had representatives from the Department of Defense, from the National Institutes of Health, and of course from the VA. It was a very broad and extremely productive meeting that focused on science, what we know about traumatic brain injury, what are the real problems on the ground for people who have traumatic brain injury, and also, very important, what we know and what we can learn about the relationship of brain injury and illnesses much later down the road. And remember that many of us have had concussions, and concussions can be military deployment related or even not deployment related, but could change the way our nervous systems respond to other events in our life. And some of the brain injuries that we have, those of you who have been in the field know this well, are inapparent, especially when they are blast related. So one doesn't have the normal symptoms of concussion that football players or our high school athletes have when they hit their head and see stars. You don't even know that you have been hit sometimes with blast-related injury. And the direct injury may not even be in the brain. It could be in the body, and then vibration waves can injure the brain. So this was a very important meeting. I think it's a great model for what could be done in other areas related to medical problems that are being experienced by our veterans. So that was the first comment that I wanted to make. And the second was that at our next meeting, the dates have not yet been identified because we have not yet been able to select the new members of the RAC committee. But at the next meeting, I would like to have adequate time for a much deeper discussion about what the issues are in your minds, in the minds of the veterans who have served and who are now suffering, so that especially our new committee members, me included, have a better feel for how we can be most helpful. So we will schedule that for the next meeting, and it will not be a 1 hour, 5-minute maximum allotment. So with that, as an introduction, I would like to ask Christy Leidy, Dr. Leidy? Thank you. To open our session, Dr. Leidy, as many know, is the program manager for the Department of Defense Gulf War Illness Research Program, managed by the congressionally directed medical research programs. Thank you for coming this morning.
Thank you to the members of the committee for inviting me today to talk about the Gulf War Illness Research Program at the Department of Defense. I'm going to start out by giving an overview of the congressionally directed medical research programs as a funding agency, and then I'll get into our Gulf War portfolio.
Dr. Leidy, this is Dr. Hunt. You should be able to control the slides either by the right, left arrow, or the arrows on the screen. There you go.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen, and welcome.
Thank you. This is terrific.
I neglected to ask if there are committee members who are with us electronically.
Yes.
I assume that's Beatrice.
Yes.
So, could you introduce yourself, Dr. Golub, to the audience?
My name is Dr. Beatrice Galan, and I'm an internist at UC San Diego with a PhD in biology with a focus on neurobiology.
Thank you, and we'll look forward to your presentation later this morning.
And before Dr. Leidy starts, I just want to mention that the committee members should have this presentation on your mind. If you want to follow along that way, it might be a little easier on the screen. Turning your head to the screen. So, Dr. Leidy, welcome.
So CDMRP manages and executes federal funds for biomedical research. We're aligned to the Department of Defense, specifically the Medical Research and Materiel Command, which is a branch of Army medicine. This command has a long history of biomedical research, primarily in support of the warfighter. CDMRP sits within this command, and we manage both intramural research programs to support medical capabilities for service members, but also many extramural research programs directed by Congress. We're a unique partnership between the public, Congress, the military, and scientists. So a little more about these unique partnerships. Our program lines can originate from advocates who year after year go to the Hill and demonstrate need to members of Congress. These advocates, disease survivors, caregivers, family members, then participate at all levels of our program cycle. They bring passion and a unique perspective to our program execution. So in response to demonstrated need, Congress adds funds to the DoD budget. These are in addition to what the President has laid out for the DoD. They are congressionally mandated and they cannot be further shaped. At the DoD, CDMRP carries out program management functions, but we also work with many other offices, such as the Office of Research Protections for regulatory requirements and the Acquisitions Office for budget requirements. We follow the Institute of Medicine's model for program management, which I'll talk a little bit about on the next slide. And our last important partners are our researchers. Not only those that apply for our funding and propose innovative, high-risk, high-reward research, but also those that sit next to us on our review panels and help us identify research that's likely to create paradigm shifts. I want to take a step back and tell you just a little bit about the history of CDMRP. In the early 1990s, grassroots advocacy efforts really heightened political awareness of public health issues. So one of the most successful of these efforts was the Breast Cancer Coalition. This is a group of breast cancer survivors and local leaders in nearly every state. In 1992, they managed to hand-deliver 600,000 letters to members of Congress and the President demanding more money for cancer research. They then summoned a group of researchers to Capitol Hill and had in hand a detailed plan for a $300 million appropriation for breast cancer research. So Congress responded by appropriating $210 million to the 93 DoD budget for a new breast cancer research program. MRMC, because of their history of biomedical research, was directed to manage this new program. However, because of the size, they sought the advice of the National Academy of Science Institute of Medicine, and their recommendations resulted in a two-tier review process, an external scientific merit review, followed by a program-level review, and the incorporation of patient advocates into program policy, investment strategy, and research focus. So the establishment of this new breast cancer program created a wave of innovative research projects. And from 96 to 2014, additional programs were added by both Congress and MRMC for administrative management by CDMRP. So this is the scope of our funding. You can see from the single breast cancer program in 1992 all the way up to our current fiscal year, where we managed over 25 different research programs. So since '92, we have received 96,000 applications, and we have made just over 13,000 awards. So the Gulfport Illness Research Program is one of these biomedical programs. The DoD has had a program in Gulfport Illness since 1994. However, it was managed under a different directorate. CDMRP did receive a small appropriation in fiscal year '06. However, our program really got its start in 2008. That year, Congress passed the National Defense Authorization Act, which directed the Secretary of the Army to utilize authorized funding specifically to undertake research on Gulf War illness. It also directed that activities under this new program include studies of treatments for the complex of symptoms known as Gulf War illness. No studies based on psychiatric illness and psychological stress as a central cause would be funded under this program. And the program would use competitive selection and peer review to identify research with the highest technical merit and military value. So with this mandate, our program was renewed at the DoD and full execution and management was transferred to CDMRP. Since that time, our vision has been no less than to improve the health and lives of veterans who have Gulf-War illness. Our charge is to fund innovative Gulf War illness research to identify effective treatments, so directly in line with the congressional mandate, to improve definition and diagnosis and better understand pathobiology and symptoms. This is a synopsis of our funding. Through fiscal year 2013, we've received a total of $69 million in congressional appropriations, which have resulted in 72 awards. Last year, we received a $20 million appropriation and added 21 awards to our portfolio. This year, we again received a $20 million appropriation, and we're on track to fund an additional 16 awards. So this shows an overview of our mechanisms. Across the top, you can see our fiscal year appropriations, and across the bottom, you can see the total number of awards made, and in parentheses are the number of pre-applications that we received. I'd like to show this because it really shows the response from the research community. Just last fiscal year, we received over 100 applications. The 21 of those that best met the intent of the program were recommended for funding. So on the left is a list of our various award mechanisms. They span very early hypothesis-driven ideas all the way up to large clinical trials and multi-site consortia. So using these mechanisms, we're able to fulfill dual goals, a scientific goal of understanding underlying biology and a clinical goal of getting treatments to the veterans as quickly as possible. So this shows the distribution of the topic areas that are funded in our portfolio. Through fiscal year 14, we have made 93 awards. Just under half of those are in the clinic. So they are pilot drug trials, they are alternative therapies, or they are bringing veterans into the clinic and taking samples for diagnostic biomarker investigations. We have a small set of population-based studies, either establishing cohorts or longitudinal investigations of already established cohorts. We have a large number of preclinical investigations looking at underlying pathobiology. So these are investigations in cell lines in animal models. An emerging field is genetics, genomics, and epigenomic discovery. We have supported development of several animal models. Early in the program, we encouraged development of exposure-relevant animal models. We have published several of them, so we now encourage investigators to use one of the published models in their proposed research. And last are our consortium awards. In this pie chart, they look like a small slice of the portfolio, but they're actually really large investments for the program. So in fiscal year 10, the programmatic panel identified gaps in the funding strategy. They wanted to see faster translation to the clinic and more coordinated treatment trials. They also acknowledged that independent investigators were having difficulties recruiting veterans to their studies. So the program decided to offer a consortium award. Under that award, both preclinical and clinical studies leading to potential treatments would occur during the period of performance, and it would be a collaboration between VA medical centers, civilian hospitals, and academia. So we offered this award. It was competed, and 2 groups were successfully awarded the consortium award in fiscal year 12. They were Dr. Mariana Morris's group at Nova Southeastern University. This is in collaboration with Gordon Broderick, who is a computational biologist also at Nova Southeastern, and Dr. Nancy Primus from the Miami VA. Their consortium is titled Understanding Gulf War Illness, an Integrative Modeling Approach. Under this award, they are characterizing multi-system dysfunction in 2 distinct mouse models, one of autonomic dysfunction and one of neuroinflammation. They are using validation and direction from computational biology. They'll then take the results that they find in the animal models and integrate them with human data. And using computational modeling, they will identify mediators and test putative therapeutics. So the overall goal is to develop a translational model for rapid identification of targets and prediction of effective therapeutic interventions which they hope to bring to pilot trial during the period of performance. So the next consortium award was Dr. Kimberly Sullivan out of Boston University. Her project is brain-immune interactions as the basis of gallbladder illness. This consortium brings together researchers from 5 sites. This actually only represents the clinical sites. There are 4 additional preclinical sites, bringing the total collaborators under this award to 9 different institutions. This is a series of clinical and preclinical studies to test specifically for chronic brain immune activation and chronic inflammation. So their goal is to identify brain immune pathways that can be targeted for intervention. And they also plan to bring these novel therapies to pilot trial at the end of the period of performance. So these large projects are for 4 years. They are just wrapping up their 2nd year. So we look forward to what is to come out of these 2 groups. So I'd like to switch now from topic areas represented in our portfolio to some of the significant findings that have come out of our funding. So over 90 publications have been submitted to the peer-reviewed literature as a result of our funding. I'm only going to present a select few of those today. So the ones on this slide represent investigations into relevant exposures to the golf war. And the first is Dr. Mariana Morris, very early work from her group that was investigating sarin exposure. So prior to this time, only high doses of sarin had been shown to lead to acute toxicity and potentially chronic health effects. Dr. Morris's investigation demonstrated that low-dose sarin exposure produces long-term changes in the neurochemistry of mice. And this finding was published in 2015. So next, Dr. Fiona Crawford found that exposure to an organophosphate-based pesticide, both individually or in combination with other golf war agents, results in neuropathological changes in the brain. So this was significant because it was one of the first models that showed combination of golf war agent exposure. And proteomic profiling in this model has led to alterations in lipid metabolism, possibly underlying these neuropathological changes in the brain. And this is being followed up with further funding from our program. So Dr. Alvin Terry found repeated exposure to pesticides at doses below those associated with acute toxicity. So ones not associated with outward signs of toxicity result in persistent alterations in the messaging transport system in the brain. This was published just this year. Also very recently published is work by Dr. Lisa Pierce, who found that epigenetic alterations in the hippocampus of rats exposed to golf war chemicals and stress are present even 1 year after exposure. So these epigenetic alterations were a suite of microRNAs that were differentially expressed. These microRNAs are being followed up as potential biomarkers of exposure. So these next set of outcomes represent clinical studies into some of the underlying mechanisms. The first is Dr. Klimas's work, which showed altered immune pathway activity following exercise challenge in veterans with golf war illness. So this provided objective support for the failure to recover that's reported in many golf war veterans following exercise. Next is Dr. Gordon Broderick's work. He showed multi-system dysregulation results in an altered but stable homeostatic drive serving to sustain golf war illness. So in this investigation, he built a mathematical model using veteran molecular data. And he found that while the golf war model is stable in terms of regulatory networks, it's clearly shifted from controls. And this is thought to potentially underlie the chronic nature of the illness. So next is Dr. Galong's work, which showed that veterans affected by golf war illness show prolonged post-exercise recovery of phosphocreatine. And this supported her earlier hypothesis that mitochondrial dysfunction underlies the symptoms of golf war illness. And last, this is a preclinical study, a collaboration between Dr. Lasley and James O'Callahan at the CDC. They found presence of stress hormone, corticosterone, exasperates the neuroinflammatory response following just a single dose of sarin surrogate. So this suggested that the presence of stress hormones primes the immune system for an exaggerated or intensified response when faced with an exposure. So this model was just published this year. Dr. O'Callaghan is collaborating on both of the consortia, and this is the model that both of those projects are using. So 4 treatment outcomes to date have been published from our program. The first is Dr. Convoy's work showing acupuncture can improve gallbladder illness symptoms, including pain, fatigue, sleep quality, and cognitive symptoms. The next is Dr. Baranek's work. He found that treatment with an amino acid supplement containing L-carnosine, which is an endogenous antioxidant, was found to increase cognitive function and reduce gastrointestinal symptoms in veterans. Dr. Boland's work with coenzyme Q10 in a pilot trial, when given at 100 milligrams daily for 16 weeks, it was found to reduce self-reported pain, fatigue, and cognitive symptoms in veterans with gallbladder illness. This was published in 2014. And last is Dr. Rabago's study. His clinical protocol was very recently published, showing xylitol and saline-based nasal irrigation can mitigate the respiratory and fatigue symptoms in gallbladder illness. So these are each significant outcomes. They are cost-effective, they are safe, and they're easily implemented outside of the clinic. So we have many, many ongoing treatment evaluations. These include Dr. Meg's work with 2 compounds known to reduce inflammation in the central nervous system, Dr. Julia Goldier's work using intranasal insulin, which is shown to be effective in other cognitive disorders. Dr. Ronald Bach of the Minnesota VA is using prednisone in an inflammation reduction trial. John Kaiser, this is exciting because it was a pharmaceutical industry that came to us with a proposal for a drug that's marketed for ADHD and narcolepsy, and they're adding a gallbladder illness specific nutrient formula to treat the symptoms of gallbladder illness. And last is Dr. Sarador's work. He is using a portable vestibular stimulator. This is a device about the size of a hearing aid that when worn is supposed to improve vestibular function and balance. So in addition to drug and device trials, we have several ongoing alternative therapies. These include probiotics for treatment of bowel symptoms, anti-inflammatories from botanical sources, sauna detoxification, cognitive therapy in the form of mind-body bridging for improvement of sleep quality, acupressure, polyphenol preparations, and yoga for pain management. So each of these, the drug and the alternative therapy trials, are all ongoing. So we expect many, many more outcomes as these studies progress. So very recently funded, in response to our new pilot trials that were offered in fiscal year 14, 6 new awards were recently made just this month. The first is Dr. Rosemary Toomey's study using D-cycloserine. This is a drug that's been used for Alzheimer's and has shown to be effective to improve mood and inflammation. This is in collaboration with the Boston Consortium. It's actually a spin-off, so Dr. Toomey will use the infrastructure under that consortium to recruit gallbladder veterans into her study. Dr. Nagelson is using vagus nerve stimulation. Dr. Fiona Crawford is following up some promising work in her animal model that showed anandamide, anti-inflammatory from natural sources, was effective at relieving some of the symptoms of gallbladder illness in her model. So Dr. Tutija is following up his work treating irritable bowel symptoms and modifying the diet of veterans. Nancy Klimas is expanding her molecular profiling work, where they found altered regulatory pathways. She found that NF-kappa was upstream of most of those altered regulatory pathways, so liposomal glutathione and curcumin are 2 natural products that target NF-kappa, so she's using these 2 in pilot trials. And last is Dr. Galone's work, expanding her CoQ10. She is developing a mitochondrial cocktail that targets both mitochondrial dysfunction and treatment of reactive oxygen species, so oxidative stress. So looking ahead to the current fiscal year, as I mentioned, we received a $20 million appropriation. In January, we held our vision setting meeting with our programmatic panel where we identified research gaps. We then developed program announcements to address those gaps. We received 3 applications in August. We screened those along with the programmatic panel this month to ensure that the applications coming in are meeting the intent of our program. We invited several to submit full applications, which will be received the end of October. The first tier review, the external scientific merit review, will occur in January, and the program level review with the programmatic panel will happen in March. And the outcome of that meeting will be funding recommendations that go to the approval authority for decision. So we anticipate, as I mentioned, 16 new awards in spring. So the priority areas this year are to improve understanding of pathobiology and symptoms, improve definition and diagnosis, and to identify effective treatments. So every application that comes in must address one of these priority areas. This is our investment strategy. In line with our congressional mandate, we are very interested in treatments and getting those to veterans as quickly as possible. So we intend to fund 40% of our appropriation in clinical trials, either large phase 3 clinical trial awards or small-scale innovative treatment evaluation pilot awards. We also plan to invest in innovation-based awards, particularly expansion of previously successful investigator-initiated research awards. New this year, we offered a population-based award looking at patterns of health in Gulf War veterans under an epidemiology research award. And last, we hope to fund a few new investigators to bring some new expertise into the field of Gulf War illness. So I've mentioned our programmatic panel a few times. These are the members of our panel. It includes both Gulf War veterans, our chair, Mr. Anthony Hardy. We also have clinicians both inside the VA medical system and in civilian hospitals, and investigators both within the VA, the DoD, and in academia. I also wanted to point out that Dr. Bobby White and Fiona Crawford, who are on the RAC, are also on our programmatic panel. And this is my last slide. So this is a screenshot of our website. And if you haven't been, I encourage you to go. We typically highlight ongoing research on our website. We also post awards that are recommended for funding, and we have lots of information about CDMOP in general. So with that, I'd like to again thank the members of the committee for inviting me, and I'm happy to take any questions about our program. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Levin. Can I begin by asking a couple of questions? So you had mentioned that one of the reasons to think about consortia was that there was difficulty recruiting people to important research studies. And given the large number of people who are suffering from GWI, I have two questions. Why is that the case, do you think? Is it an issue of people knowing what's out there? Is it trust? Is it access? Is it connection with clinical care? What do you think the problem is? And second, in the first year and a half or so of the consortia, do you think that those problems have been overcome?
So to answer your first question, I think access is the biggest issue.
So people can't get in? Location.
The investigators don't have access to the Gulf War veterans. So you have to remember that these are investigators at academic institutions. They're not used to working with veteran populations. So they have trouble accessing and getting names of potential subjects for their studies. It's very hard to get access to the NBC. it's very hard to get into the VA records unless you actively collaborate with an investigator from one of those groups.
And do the review committees consider feasibility of projects and enrollment?
They do, and we have gotten much better at including investigators that have experience with military populations on our review panels that do look at that. And we encourage collaboration with DoD and VA investigators in our program announcements, so that's one thing that we do look for. And I'm not sure I understand your second.
Have the consortia solved the problem?
For their projects, they have. They both have collaborations with VA investigators. So in Boston and Florida, they are actively recruiting. But some of our
and they're recruiting as hoped for.
Yes.
So that is a solution to the...
Absolutely. Yes, the collaborative effort.
As a consortium director, I will say that, yes, working together as a team has really improved our ability to recruit participants from across the country. And that was the idea of the consortium, was to not just recruit from your particular area, even if you do have that strength, but to try and recruit from all across the country. Part of some of the previous studies had been a problem because the result would say, well, to just locate to that geographic area and that group of individuals you're seeing, it may not correspond to all veterans across the country. And so part of the reason to do the multi-sites was to have veterans from across the country.
How about the number of LOIs you can ask?
We, as our consortium, have set up a biorepository and of blood and other samples, and we have been approached by probably in the order of at least 10 other investigators who don't have those samples and want to work with us to utilize those samples. So just as an investment for that, which was a relatively smallish investment, I think it's really going to pan out in terms of bringing in lots of other investigators who have very good ideas who now don't have to go out and get all the blood. It's been 2 years doing that. We actually have this resource ready for that.
I would endorse that too. I've come from initially the world of HIV, where it was so common for somebody to come up to me and say, I need 200 HIV samples, 200 controls, you can get that for me, right? And, oh, we didn't write you into the grant, you can do that because your passion, you will see through. And that has been the case of Gulf War almost times 25. You know, this is we're all very passionate, we have a lot of zeal. But it's to keep the tricky part of having a biorepository that's linked to very accurate clinical assessment is what drives a great big research effort. And it's really cool watching these LOIs come in. I'm just loving it. We have some residual stuff from prior work that the VA and the DoD sponsored, and we're also getting a lot of LOIs to access that. It's really cool. It means we've got a lot of people are coming in, and this open door, which was one piece of what the consortium has been perceived as open. A letter of intent, I'm sorry, letter of intent. So when the DoD process, you submit a letter of intent, and they do a first tier.
I used to come in on.
I'm sorry.
I don't know if your card.
Somebody is speaking on the phone. Please press mute if you are.
I'm thinking now. I take this left. Yeah. So
Yeah, this is Dr. Hunt. I contacted the operator who will close this line down. And for the rest of you that are on the line, if your phones are not muted, we get background noise and we will shut your line off. So
Thank you.
That should happen shortly. Dr. Hauser, I apologize.
Thank you, Nancy. I'm sorry I interrupted.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Just in reinforcing how important it is to have that clinical data set linked to a biorepository, linked to be the big resource that powers a tremendous amount of the biomarker pathogenesis work that is been done in this field. Is very, very exciting.
So I'd like to add one thing to this concept, which is that there are people who run biorepositories know there are two types of materials in biorepositories. There are things that run out, and there are things that are permanent. So DNA is pretty permanent, but serum and other things run out. And understanding particularly the things that run out, which are the most precious, and how to miniaturize needs so that the maximum number of good studies can be identified. But the main point that I'm making is that nothing is more essential than biorepositories, but they they can't be maintained on their own. They need support even for the dispersal of the biorepository materials. And I think it's a relatively small extra expense, but to consider the relatively small additional resources so that biorepositories can actually do that second function of dispersing for things that weren't even known about when the samples were collected is I think, essential. And it's a problem that all biorepositories have. It's easy to get funding to make the biorepository compared with maintaining and sending samples out. So are you adequately funded for the dispersal?
We are not adequately funded. We are adequately funded to have the biorepository set up, thanks in great part to Dr. Hines was already, infrastructure is already there. So that's allowed us to do that. So for each of these grants that we're applying for, at the moment, what we're doing is adding in additional funds for some of those issues because we just don't have them. So that's our strategy at the moment. But I think you raised an important point that we didn't really expect this much interest in our biorepository right away, so that's probably something of discussion.
Which actually was something that was built into the consortium awards. They're encouraged to apply for additional seed funding as their projects progress. And we do consider that when we're reviewing proposals from that group. And I did want to add a couple of things about the biorepository. One is that it's important to keep in mind that there's potential for genomic, epigenomic investigations from these samples, and there are operating procedures for collecting those and preserving them appropriately so you can do those investigations long term. And also it's important to link exposure data to the patient samples that go into the biorepository because that is something that's missing from some of the DoD established repositories.
And the big data, DoD big data thing is important to note. The new project where the epigenetic, et cetera, data will be deposited in the larger big data funded project whose acronym I do not recall. But that's really cool because there's no reason to do all these gene studies over and over again. We do them to this biorepository sample, and then people can use that data set to explore all kinds of hypotheses.
Let's go back to your recruitment question briefly. So you were asking, is there an issue with recruitment for Gulf War veterans, and why was that a problem? And so the back history of some of this is that for many years, Gulf War veterans wasn't a lot of research, they were not taken seriously, and many of them were turned off by that, and that's a very reasonable thing. And I think we've worked very hard, those of us who have been doing this research for many years, to have the veterans trust us and come and do our studies. So the only way we can get our studies done is by veterans who are willing to take their time and come and do our studies. And so we're very grateful for that. And anybody who's on the line today, please consider doing these studies because that's the only way we can get these results and really move the pathobiology and the treatment is by you willing to take your time and doing this for us. So I thank you ahead for each of you who are listening and willing to do this.
And it brings one other point that Denise reminded me of. It's terribly important when we're writing our grants, if there's any room at all in the budget, to include travel funds for our veterans because our patients, if they can't afford it, they travel from far, far away to participate. Very often, for scientific reasons as well as recruitment reasons, it's fantastic to bring people from other areas into the cohorts. I know in our VA studies I've been able to put travel funds for this Women Veterans Project or Gender Project, and oh man, we're having trouble recruiting that study, so it'd be really great. little call out to all you women that's out there, please consider volunteering for a study. We do have travel funds. But for all of these future studies as we try to get these cohorts, one of the big difficult things in getting these cohorts is that in the VA we don't have Gulf War clinics per se, except in my VA because I established one, and Dr. Hunt because he established one. But the otherwise, the patients are being cared for in the broader sense of the word, but they're not so easy to find, and it's very difficult to locate them for clinical studies.
I'm so glad you brought this up, this is Steve, because I've just been sitting here thinking that one of the problems is, we haven't done a great job of taking care of our Gulf War veterans and supporting them in the ways that they need. So HSR&D, a big emphasis these days in VA is linking research to clinical care. And I really think that we need to think about it the other way around, and that is linking clinical care. Once we have good clinical care, taking care of folks with whatever's going on with them, then linking that to research, so that the research is informed by a body of veterans that at least are receiving the care they need to carry on with their lives and so on.
And Dr. Clemens, I know you're working on trying to get the Gulf War Registry more available. Trying to get that available to Gulf War researchers, which would make a tremendous difference in what we're trying to do. As more studies are funded, it's more difficult to get do the studies. So that would be a tremendous resource. And Dr. Lay, I know you're trying to see if there's any way the DMDC data set can be released again. That would be incredibly useful to all researchers for
This is Wes Ashford from the RISC in California. I'd like to make a comment on the Gulf War Registry, which at this point is under Dr. Lauren Erickson, and it's one of the, we had a big success with the burn pit registry. Drew Helmer helped out on that, but I think that this is a very important direction to try and take this, what I believe is an old paper and pencil file somewhere and upgrade it to a good computerized record so we can know where the current Gulf War veterans are and help them get involved in these studies. It would be a very important direction to help facilitate.
That registry was made into a database as soon as it was produced, even back in the 90s. And that Office of Public Health had that under slides back in April of this year. But that was always put into a database right away, and the veterans' names was digitized so that they could get or put on into the database also, so that the Gulf War review. All that information has always been in electronic form. And that's how they were able to come up with the legislation back in '94, because of the 17,000 Gulf War veterans that had non-diagnosed illness because of their clinical findings from the doctors back in 1993-4 time frame, which were clinically diagnosed to have non-diagnosed illnesses at the time frame.
So Dr. Money, so here's this research advisory committee that's got advisor the VA on its portfolio, and you are managing with the help of this fantastic organization, the DoD portfolio. How coordinated are these efforts? How does that work?
So I think that is improving. I mentioned that we have a vision setting meeting at the beginning of our program cycle, and every year that comes, and he presents the VA's portfolio and helps us really to identify those gaps and the program announcements we're going to put out the next year. And there's really open communication between Vic and I. Oftentimes during application review, we will talk to each other about potential overlap and investigators that are proposing the same research to both organizations. So we work those things out. We do contribute to the report to Congress. We do work with Vic on the DoD's portion of that report. And the VA, as you know, funded a spin-off project from their consortia looking at gender differences. So I think our collaborative ways are improving.
Well, I wanted to sort of pick up on something that Nancy and Dr. Klimas and also Dr. Hunt spoke about the connections to clinical care from the research findings. And this may be something that is a broader question that's not DoD specific, but from your perspective, you described some exciting preliminary publications, acupuncture, CoQ, carnosine, xylitol. How are those being moved forward so that they benefit the people who are suffering as quickly as possible? Are definitive trials needed? These are things that are available to all of us. Are they brought right into the VA healthcare system for use? How do you think about that pipeline?
So that's an excellent question. So our funding does fund early innovative pilot trials that at the end of our funding, the investigators are positioned to go into larger scale trials that sometimes are outside of our arena, outside of our support capabilities. I know that CoQ10 has been discussed by the VA. I'm not sure where that stands. And I know Dr. Baranick was here last week, or last meeting, sorry, and he was asked this question about his carnosine treatment and applying to the VA for a follow-up study. So those things have not happened. Dr. Conboy, we are actually continuing to fund and follow up on her acupuncture findings. She's doing a survey of participants and furthering her acupuncture protocol. So we have continued in that area. But there are many, many promising pilot trials that we're funding right now that hopefully these investigators will be positioned to go into a larger trial at the end of our study. We have the clinical trial award mechanism that we can follow up on those. But possibly not to the extent that something supported by the VA could further.
The VA has cooperative studies program, which is a definitive study.
Mention a word.
All right. Yes, Tim?
So I want to make this comment about the trials. It's likely that we can only take on a small fraction of what might appear to be promising avenues to begin with, just because the cost of forming a definitive clinical trial is astronomically high nowadays. It's very hard to do. A meter drop is about $20 million on a definitive clinical trial. So the results have got to be, I think, extremely promising. The studies, the preliminary studies have to be exceedingly well designed in order to get by the scientific review barrier for a definitive clinical trial. And I think that remains a challenge with some of these small studies, is taking them not to definitive clinical trial, but taking them to relatively small clinical trials, which is almost invariably required by the community. So to look at enrolling several hundreds of thousands of patients clinical trial, and one of the challenges with agencies is about how to stimulate. Don't want to call them replication trials precisely, but at least trials that are designed to explore the same general hypothesis, enable one to understand both feasibility and promise going forward. I think pharma is really good at this. In one sense, government, not so good. But pharma is largely going through the deselection process as it goes through this, and we are trying to go through an enrichment of the selection process.
And that brings, our job as an advisory committee is how would you really jumpstart, get more momentum going, and how do you do this? You'll see that the DoD protocols, the clinical trials portfolio, has a tremendous number of nutraceuticals in it. And that is in large part because when you're done with small nutraceutical studies, generally they're implemented, whether or not they're completely proven that patients find that and they're out there buying carnitine or CoQ10 or whatever. And we use them in clinical settings. I certainly use nutraceuticals in my clinical setting based on whatever data I can gather. Because I got sick people in front of me right now, and I'm going to use what I can if it's safe. So you'll see a lot of very safe studies in the portfolios right now that have a lot of over-the-counter types of preparations. You don't see a lot of pharma. There's some. I'm not saying it's not there. You don't see a lot of pharmaceuticals or biologic response modifiers, and certainly, they're very valuable places to go as researchers. And it was my thought, and to some part the DoD has a mechanism, and the VA has a mechanism, but it's not a very, very speedy mechanism for doing just what Tim was talking about, which is, how would you construct a program that can do the initial study, the validation study, and then deselect and do the phase 2/3. And I think that instead of doing it project by project, we might want to think of a mechanism, a consortium of sorts, clinical trials consortium, that doesn't necessarily have the drug in hand that they want to test, but rather develops a mechanism. Certainly, I was just at NIH yesterday, and neurology has a mechanism just like that. An in-house mechanism with the biostat core, actually the recruitment core, for using innovative biologics in neuroinflammatory diseases.
Clinical trials group and the cancer trials groups have been doing it
Right,
for years.
exactly. But we don't really have that for all four of this. So our issue has been across the board, we're very slow because we can't access patients. The patients don't really want to be accessed, they're disappointed in what's happened so far. I know that, many patients still want to be accessed. But some of them very, very disappointed in our speed of response, that they're discouraged. And I think we could create a mechanism, a combined mechanism, could be VA mechanism, to develop a clinical trials consortium that has the infrastructure, and then we apply that group to implement the trials that need to be done. You only fund innovation, right? You're not ever going to do a duplicate study. It's not in your mission. We'll end up doing the duplicate studies because we're the only other funding mechanism to do it. So is there some way to create a balance here that allows us to move it, propel it, and get it to the point where we can use it? And I think we should really think as a RAC, Research Advisory Committee, how we might help borrow structures that have been very useful in other fields and bring it to this field.
You had mentioned in June, Nancy, the possibility of doing this as part of a center of excellence or a PACT or some, attach the clinical care to the clinical research.
That's almost answering yet another question. You need patients to do science, and we can't find them because we haven't organized our clinical care enough to attract them, care for them well, and have them available for research studies. And so I think that we need to do these clinical centers of excellence that attach to research centers. But they could be the infrastructure. In fact, when I was at the NIH yesterday, we were talking about this for a different area. And they were saying, yes, what we could do in our infrastructure is fund research clinicians through the research funds to create centers of excellence for disease and chronic fatigue syndrome. We could create such consortia and fund a couple of lines in each site, and that could become the epicenter of the clinical center of excellence, because those clinical investigators can become the passion and zeal of people in the sites that create the clinical care models.
So I have just one thing to add to that. So you mentioned that we do fund a lot of alternative therapies because we can get those quickly to patients, but there is still some work to be done on the underlying mechanisms, and both of your efforts are working really hard at uncovering those, but design of new treatments and new drugs. Unfortunately, it has to wait until we uncover some of those answers. And there's also the hurdle of the FDA that is also expensive for treatment trials.
Jim, were you going to say something? Okay. Dr. Leidy, thank you.
Thank you.
Running a little bit late. This was a great, I think, discussion.